My boyfriend's fragile friend accused me of being jealous in front of everyone, and he took her side. Meeting my boyfriend's inner circle for the first time felt less like hanging out with friends and more like walking into a job interview I never applied for. He did not say it exactly like that. Of course. The way he framed it, it was supposed to be this sweet, important moment, almost like introducing me to his family. But all I could hear in my head was the warning he had given me the night before while we sat on my tiny couch sharing cold pizza straight from the box. He called it a serious talk, and that should have been my first clue that this was not going to be just another casual coffee with friends from campus. My name is Naomi, by the way, and if you had told me back then that a simple hangout at a random coffee shop near the university was going to turn into this huge emotional mess that took over months of my life, I probably would have laughed and said I was not that dramatic. Turns out I am absolutely that dramatic. And honestly, I think I earned it. So there we were, my feet tucked under me on the couch, the light from the kitchen buzzing annoyingly. When he cleared his throat and did that thing where he tried to sound calm and wise at the same time, he said there was something I needed to understand before I met his friends. Because there was a girl in the group who was different. That was the word he used. Different. He said she had gone through a lot in the past, which apparently was code for some kind of emotional crisis in high school that nobody liked to talk about directly, but everyone loved to orbit around like it was the sun. He said the group had promised to always protect her, that his parents knew her, loved her, basically treated her like a daughter, and that every girlfriend he had ever had needed to get along with her. He tried to make it sound reasonable, like, I just want everyone to get along. But then he dropped the part that stuck in my chest like a stone. He admitted he had ended 2 relationships before ours because the girlfriends created drama with this girl, and he refused to choose between them. I remember sitting there holding a crust of pizza that I was no longer eating, staring at him and trying to keep my face neutral while my brain screamed. He said things like, I just want you to know how important she is to us, and I really hope you two like each other, and please do not make me choose because I will not. The way he said I will not was so gentle and firm at the same time that it felt less like a request and more like a contract I never signed. On the outside, I nodded, smiled, made some joke about how I play well with others. But inside, I felt this ugly little knot of competitiveness start to form. I was not even a jealous person before that. At least I did not think I was. But something about being warned in advance, something about hearing that his loyalty had already been claimed by someone else before I even met her, made me feel like I was walking into a game where everyone knew the rules except me. After he went home that night, I sat there on the same couch with the empty pizza box still on the coffee table, staring at the dark television screen like it might replay the whole conversation for me so I could decide if I had imagined the tone. You know when you keep hearing a sentence on loop in your head, and it gets worse every time? For me, it was his line about other girlfriends not fitting in and how he had learned from that. The way he said it made it sound like he had done some deep emotional work, but the longer I sat there, the more it sounded like a warning label slapped on my forehead before I had even opened my mouth. I picked up my phone 3 different times to text him and ask, point blank, if he really meant that one girl could cost me the relationship, and 3 different times I put the phone back down because I already knew the answer. He had told me who he was. He had told me who she was to him. I just did not want to believe that my choices were, accept this weird little triangle or lose him. So instead of texting him, I scrolled through old pictures of us on a social media app, trying to remind myself that before all of this, he had been kind and funny and normal. There were photos of us studying together, walking around campus, him making a stupid face while I tried to be serious. None of those pictures had her in the background. But suddenly I could not stop wondering if she had been the one taking some of them. At some point, my roommate came out of her room to grab water and found me frozen there with my phone in my hand and the living room light still off. She asked if I was okay, and that way people ask when they already know the answer is no. I told her we could talk about it later because I did not even have the language for what I was feeling yet. It was not just jealousy, although that was definitely in the mix. It was more like being handed a script for a play I had never auditioned for, and being told I either needed to hit every mark or they would replace me with the girl who had been playing the role for years. By the time I finally dragged myself to bed, my brain was buzzing and my chest hurt in that heavy, slow way that means you are not going to sleep for a while. I remember staring at the ceiling and thinking that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe once I met her it would all make sense and we would laugh about how nervous I had been. Looking back, that was the last night I could pretend I had not been warned. When I told my roommates about it later that night, they looked at me like I had lost my mind. One of them, the loud one who never filtered anything, actually put her drink down and said, "So he basically told you you are on probation, and if you breathe wrong around this girl, you are out?" Another one rolled her eyes and called it manipulation in the most obvious packaging. I laughed it off and defended him, because of course I did. I said things like, "It is not that serious," and "he is just protective," and "she went through a lot, maybe she really does need support." But I also kept replaying his exact words in my head. I had never even seen this girl, and somehow I was already the potential villain in a story I did not know. Part of me wanted to be cool and understanding and prove that I could be the chill girlfriend who did not make waves. Another part of me, the part I tried not to look at directly, wanted to walk into that coffee shop and quietly prove I was better than her at everything. One of them, the one who always painted her nails at the kitchen table instead of at the actual desk in her room, actually put her drink down and said she needed me to repeat the whole thing slowly, because she thought she had misheard. So I went back through it detail by detail, the part about his friend being fragile, the warning about not making her uncomfortable, the casual way he tossed in that little line about ending past relationships when girlfriends did not get along with her. By the time I got to the end, my other roommate was standing with the fridge door open and just staring at me over a carton of orange juice, like the juice was the only thing keeping her from exploding. They started throwing out questions the way people do when they are trying to make sure you have not completely lost your mind. Had I ever seen this girl cry? Had he ever defended me that way to anyone? Did he even ask what I needed out of meeting his friends? Or was the entire speech a list of expectations about how I should behave so his life would stay comfortable? I kept saying things like, "He is just protective," and "he has known her for a long time," because admitting out loud that it sounded bad made it too real. I know how that sounds. I heard myself. I just was not ready to hear myself yet. At one point, the roommate with the chipped coffee mug leaned back in her chair and said that any time a guy opens with a list of rules about someone in his life you have never even met, it is not about protection. It is about control. She told me about an ex who had an honorary cousin that everyone tiptoed around because she was known to have breakdowns when she did not get her way, and how every argument eventually became about keeping that one girl calm instead of solving the actual problem. I laughed it off and said my situation was not that serious, that we were just in college and people were dramatic, but the truth is, my stomach twisted because it sounded way too familiar. I went to bed that night telling them and myself that I was going to be chill about it, that I was not going to be the jealous girlfriend who could not handle a female friend. And they let me say it even though none of us really believed it. The meetup was set for a Saturday afternoon at a coffee shop near campus that he said they went to all the time. Of course, they had their special place. He told me exactly what time to be there and what booth they usually sat in, and I could tell he was excited for me to see that side of his life. On the walk there, he squeezed my hand and kept telling me how glad he was that I was being open-minded. I wanted to tell him I was not actually open-minded, I was just trying not to blow up my relationship before I finished midterms, but I kept my mouth shut. Instead, I smoothed down my sweater for the 10th time, checked my reflection in the glass door, and tried to breathe like a normal person, instead of someone about to audition for the role of acceptable girlfriend, in front of an audience that already had a favorite. I saw her the second we stepped inside. You know when there is one person in a group that everyone is unconsciously turned toward? That was her. She was in the middle of the booth, not at the edge where it would be easy for someone to slide in or out, but right in the center like the axis of a wheel. She had on this simple white dress that honestly would have looked basic on anyone else, but on her it read like a costume. It made her look small and delicate and soft, like one of those characters in a movie who cries beautifully and never has mascara smudged under her eyes. The two guys sitting with her were angled in, one with his elbow on the table listening to her like she was giving a TED Talk on feelings, the other laughing at something she said like she had just delivered the punchline of the year. When my boyfriend led me over and said my name, she tilted her head, smiled sweetly, and gave me this slow once-over that was almost polite enough to pretend I did not notice. She asked my major, where I was from, how long we had been together, all in this soft, careful voice that would have sounded kind to anybody who was not paying attention. But there was a sharpness under it, like every question had a little hook. When I said I worked part-time at the campus help desk to pay my part of the rent, she gave this thoughtful nod and said something like, "That must be exhausting, balancing everything," in a tone that somehow made me feel like I had shown up to a dinner party with my tag still hanging out of my shirt. When I mentioned I lived with roommates off campus, she made a passing comment about how she could never handle the chaos and how she was too sensitive for that, which I am pretty sure was not an insult but landed like one anyway. It was all like that. Sweet on the surface, just a little sour underneath. By the time the food came, I felt like I had been through an emotional airport security line, and she had inspected every inch of my personality and stamped it conditionally allowed. I tried to keep my hands steady as I passed a bowl of soup across the table, because the place was crowded and there were people everywhere, and I really did not want to be the clumsy girlfriend who spilled something on the first hangout. I was holding the bowl with both hands, focusing on not shaking, when she suddenly shifted in her seat. It was this quick, sharp movement, like she was startled by something, but nothing had happened. Her knee bumped the table, the bowl lurched, and suddenly hot soup was all over her perfect white dress. The sound she made was loud and sharp enough that half the coffee shop turned to look. She stood up so fast the bench scraped the floor and pointed at me with this horrified, betrayed expression, like I had stabbed her instead of accidentally spilling soup. "Why would you do that?" she cried, voice wobbling just enough to sound fragile but clear enough to carry. "You did that on purpose." I swear my brain blanked for a second. My hands were still out in front of me, empty now, and everyone at the table was staring. My boyfriend grabbed my arm so hard his fingers dug into my skin and hissed my name like I was a misbehaving toddler. He did not even look at the table to see what had actually happened. He just went straight into damage control mode, but not for me. "You need to apologize," he said, voice low but intense, like he was holding his anger back by the thinnest thread. "Naomi, seriously, what is wrong with you?" My throat closed. I started stammering, saying it was an accident, that she moved, that I had not meant to, but I could hear my own voice shaking, and I knew it sounded defensive instead of sincere. The two guys were watching with that particular mix of discomfort and disapproval that says, "We do not like this, but we are not going to do anything about it." She clutched at the front of her dress and blinked tears into her eyes, making this tiny sniffing sound that punched directly through every protective instinct in the room. People at nearby tables had gone quiet. I could feel all of them, strangers, judging me. I apologized. Of course I apologized. I said I was so sorry, I did not mean to. I would pay for the dry cleaning. I would buy her a new dress. Whatever she wanted. I could feel my face burning and my eyes pricking. Not just from embarrassment, but from this weird sense of being trapped in a script I had not written. She let me stand there and babble for a full minute before giving a tiny nod and saying it was fine, in the tone people use when it is clearly not fine. My boyfriend loosened his grip on my arm but did not let go completely. Nobody asked what I had seen, that she had jerked her leg into the table. Nobody asked if I was burned by the soup splashing back on my hands. The story was already written. The new girlfriend had accidentally spilled soup on the girl everyone protected. And that was all anyone needed to know. I cried in the bathroom, obviously. I stood there staring at myself under the harsh fluorescent light, eyes red, mascara starting to smudge, trying to decide if I was overreacting or if everyone else was underreacting. My hands stung where the hot soup had splashed. But it was the bruised feeling on my arm that really got to me. I could still feel where his fingers had dug into my skin, like his loyalty had left a physical mark. I splashed water on my face, took a few deep breaths, and practiced a smile that did not look like I had just been emotionally hit by a truck. I went back out there, sat down, and pretended nothing had happened, because that was easier than being the girl who made a scene. Later, when we walked back toward campus, he told me again that she had been through a lot, and that I needed to be more careful. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I am sorry I grabbed you." Just a lecture about being more cautious around someone fragile. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted metal. I wanted to tell him I had watched her knock the table. I wanted to tell him I had seen the way her eyes flicked to the other guys before she screamed, like she was checking to make sure they were watching. Instead, I said, "I am sorry," and let him talk. When winter break rolled around and I went back to my parents' place, I thought maybe I would keep things simple and just not bring up any of it. I lasted about 2 days. On the third night after dinner, my mother sat down across from me at the kitchen table with her "we need to talk" face on, which is never a good sign. She asked how things were going with my boyfriend, using his name like it tasted polite but unfamiliar, and when I tried to explain how complicated things had become, she raised her eyebrows in that way that always made me feel like I had just failed a pop quiz I did not know I was taking. I tried to give her the short version. I said there had been a lot of unhealthy dynamics with his friends, that there was this girl everyone treated like porcelain, that I had been pushed into second place one too many times, and that I had decided it was not the kind of relationship I wanted. She listened without interrupting, which honestly made me more nervous than if she had started in with the commentary right away. When I finished, she took a sip of her tea and said, "So you left because his friends did not like you?" I almost swallowed my own tongue. I told her that was not what I had said. I told her it was more like I had been expected to accept being tested and blamed for things I had not done, and he had made it clear from the beginning that I would never be as important as this other girl. My mother shrugged and said something like, "Relationships are complicated. Sometimes you have to be patient with people who have issues." Which, okay, fine, that is true in general, but it hit me in the worst possible way coming from her. She had spent most of my childhood telling me not to make a fuss, not to be too sensitive, not to rock the boat, and now here she was basically suggesting I should have stayed longer and tried harder. My father was there too, pretending to read something on his tablet while very obviously listening. After a minute, he put it down and said, "It sounds like you overreacted. Kiddo. If everyone else could handle it, maybe you are the one who needs to toughen up a little." I stared at him, and for a second it felt like I was 8 years old again, sitting at that same table being told to let it go when my older cousin made fun of me for crying. Out of nowhere, I heard myself say, "Maybe if you two had not spent my entire life asking me to tolerate other people's bad behavior, I would not keep ending up in situations where that is the only thing I know how to do." The silence after that was loud. My mother's mouth tightened. My father cleared his throat. I almost apologized, because that is my reflex, but I did not. I just sat there, heart pounding, eyes burning, letting the words exist in the air. My mother finally said, "We did the best we could," in that stiff way that means she felt attacked. I said, "I know, because part of me does believe that," but I also added, "And I'm allowed to do better for myself now." That conversation did not fix anything. We did not hug it out and cry. If anything, it made things more awkward for the rest of the visit. But for once, I did not backtrack. I did not try to make everyone comfortable. I let my parents sit with the idea that I was not going to be the family buffer forever. It is funny because I realized then that the whole mess with the girl in the white dress was just a louder version of something I had been doing my whole life. I had always been the one smoothing things over, apologizing first, making jokes to lighten the mood, swallowing my anger because I did not want to be too much. With her, it was like that pattern got turned up so loud I could not ignore it anymore. She was the mirror I never wanted to look into. My mother did what she always does when reality does not match her expectations. She launched into a soft monologue about how relationships are hard work, and people these days give up too easily. She asked if maybe I'd been too sensitive, if perhaps his friend really was fragile and I should have been more patient. She said, "You feel things so intensely, like it was a character flaw instead of the only reason I had noticed something was wrong." Later that night, my father knocked on my door. Something he rarely does. He sat on the edge of my bed and said that sometimes people build their whole personality around taking care of someone who refuses to grow up. And if I stayed long enough, I would start shrinking myself to fit whatever gaps they needed filled. He looked tired when he said it, in a way that made me wonder how many times he had done that for my mother, and how many times he had watched me do the same. By the time I went back to campus, I could not unhear any of it. When I got back to campus after that miserable break, something had shifted. Maybe it was finally hearing my own voice push back against my mother's expectations. Or maybe it was just exhaustion, but I was done pretending I could shrink myself small enough to make everyone comfortable. So when he texted suggesting we all go to the campus recreation center because the group wanted to reset after the awkward coffee shop moment, I actually considered saying no. But part of me, the stubborn part that still wanted to prove something, said yes anyway. She appeared in a pale pastel swimsuit, nothing flashy, but perfectly chosen to make her look like some soft, innocent thing who would never hurt anybody. She clung to my boyfriend's arm and told him in that small voice that she was kind of scared of the water, but that she trusted him to help her. I watched him melt, watched his whole body language soften as he reassured her he would not let anything bad happen. She wrapped her arms around his neck when they went into the water, holding on like a child, and I felt something twist in my chest that I did not want to name. I hated it. I hated how easily she slipped into that role. I hated how natural it looked on him. I admitted out loud that I was not a strong swimmer either, and joked that I would probably just stay near the shallow end and not drown. One of the guys, the quieter one with glasses who always seemed to be half watching, half thinking, offered to help me with some basics if I wanted. His voice was calm, matter of fact, like he was offering to help with homework, not save me from public humiliation. I took him up on it, partly because I really did not feel safe alone in the deeper water, and partly because, yes, I will admit it, there was a petty part of me that liked the idea of being helped too, of not being the one standing on the sidelines while everyone fussed over her. While he showed me how to move my arms and how to float without panicking, I could feel my boyfriend's gaze flickering over toward us. He kept looking up from whatever performance she was putting on in the deeper part of the pool, checking on me, watching me, and that attention felt like some kind of twisted consolation prize. I tried to focus on my breathing and my kicks, but I could feel her eyes on me too, sharp and calculating whenever she thought no one else was looking. Every time my boyfriend swam a little closer to see how I was doing, her smile tightened just a little. Then I got a cramp. It was not dramatic at first, just a weird tightness in my right calf that I tried to flex out, but it got worse fast. I lost the rhythm of my kicks, swallowed water, and for a second all I could feel was panic. My foot could not find the bottom. My arms started flailing, and it was like my body forgot how to do the thing it had been doing just fine seconds before. I heard myself make this awful choking sound and felt water go up my nose. Before I could really process how stupidly scared I was, the guy with glasses was right there, grabbing me around the waist and hauling me toward the side. It was not romantic. It was messy, fast, all elbows and splashing and my coughing in his ear. He got me to the edge in a few seconds that felt like hours, and I clung to the cold tile while I tried to catch my breath. My heart was racing, my eyes were stinging, and I could feel the adrenaline buzzing in my fingertips. And then I heard her voice again, cutting through the noise of the pool. "Seriously?" she snapped, sounding more annoyed than concerned. "Could you be more obvious?" I looked up, still gasping, and saw her standing a little ways away in the water, arms crossed, expression twisted into something that did not match the sweet persona she usually wore. My boyfriend was beside her, looking between us, frozen. The guy with glasses, still holding onto my shoulder, narrowed his eyes and said sharply that I had just had a cramp and almost gone under, and maybe we could skip the guilt trip for 5 seconds. Her mouth dropped open like she could not believe he had talked to her like that. The other guy, the blonde one who had always been kind of goofy before, raised his voice across the pool and said that if she wanted everyone to pretend nothing was wrong, maybe she should stop acting like every situation was about her. You could feel the energy shift in the water. People nearby stopped what they were doing. The mask slipped from her face for just a heartbeat, and the look underneath was pure fury. My boyfriend still did not move. That was somehow the worst part. He just stood there, torn between the girl he had promised to protect and the girlfriend he had almost watched drown because he was too busy playing lifeguard to someone who did not actually need saving. I met his eyes and saw the panic there, but I also saw the hesitation, and that was enough. Something in me clicked. I got out of the pool without saying a word. I grabbed my towel, wrapped it tight around me, and walked toward the locker room, my body shaking partly from the cold and partly from anger. Behind me, I could hear them arguing, voices overlapping, but I did not turn around. In the locker room, I sat on the little bench in front of my locker and tried to make sense of the fact that I had panicked and went under for a moment in front of people I knew and somehow still felt like I was the one causing trouble. He followed me a few minutes later, coming into the doorway of the women's locker room just far enough that it was technically allowed but still inappropriate. He looked stressed, wet hair dripping onto his shoulders, towel slung around his waist. He apologized, sort of. He said he had overreacted, that he was just worried about keeping the peace, that things had gotten out of hand. He never said, "I should have checked on you first." He never said, "I am sorry I made you feel like you were disposable." Instead, he kept circling back to how unusual it was that the guys had talked back to her, how upset she had been, how fragile she still was inside. I listened, watching his mouth move, and realized that every apology was actually about her, not me. Every concern he named belonged to the girl in the white dress, not the girlfriend who had been dragged out of the water minutes before. I do not know what came over me exactly. Maybe it was the bruises on my arm from the coffee shop. Maybe it was the taste of pool water still in my throat. Maybe it was the look of confusion when the guys finally stopped treating her like a glass doll. But I reached up, took off the little ring he had given me a month earlier as some kind of promise, and placed it gently in his wet hand. I do not want to be in a relationship where I have to compete with someone you already decided is more important, I said, my voice surprisingly steady for someone whose legs were still trembling. You chose her the second you warned me I could not mess up. You just did not say it out loud. He stared at the ring like it was going to explain what was happening. He asked if I was serious, if I really wanted to throw everything away, over one bad afternoon, and I almost laughed. I told him it was not one afternoon. It was every moment he had believed her without question, every time he had asked me to make myself smaller so she would not feel threatened. It was the way he had told me he would not choose, while obviously having already chosen. I did not yell. I did not cry. I just stood up, wrapped the towel tighter, and walked past him. I walked back to my off-campus apartment alone, hair still damp, flip-flops slapping against the sidewalk, feeling this weird mix of grief and relief. My roommates were there when I got home, sprawled on the couch with a bag of chips between them. And when they saw my face, they muted the show. They were watching without asking any questions. I told them everything from the soup to the pool, and they made all the appropriate outraged noises, and by the time I finished, I was shaking again. They asked the obvious question, "Are you really done?" And I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. The next morning, I woke up to a string of messages on my phone. None of them were from him. There were 2 from the guy with glasses, asking if I was okay and apologizing for not speaking up sooner. There was one from the blonde guy, saying he finally realized how screwed up things had been for a long time. There were none from her, obviously, and none from my ex. My roommates joked that he was probably still holding the ring and staring at it like it would turn back time. By that evening, his messages finally started coming in, and I read every single one twice, even though they all said the same thing in different words. He was sorry if he had made me feel cornered. He had never meant to weaponize his friend against me. He understood that I was hurt, but also hoped I could see it from her side. There was a picture of the ring sitting in his palm with a caption about how he did not know what to do with it now. For a second, my thumb hovered over the call button because the part of me that hates leaving anything messy wanted to explain. To make him understand that this was not about the ring or even just about the girl. It was about every time I had swallowed something to keep the peace and how that had become the default setting in my life. Instead of calling, I put the phone face down on my pillow and stared at the wall while my brain tried to negotiate a compromise that did not exist. Maybe we could stay together, but I would just see her less. Maybe I could go to group plans and sit at the far end of the table and pretend I did not notice when he laughed harder at her jokes. Maybe I could be the cool, understanding girlfriend he clearly wanted. The longer I sat there, the more all of those maybes started to sound like ways to make myself smaller again, after I had finally done something that felt big. By mid-morning, I made the mistake of opening a social media app. There was a new picture of the 3 of them at the recreation center from the day before, posted by the blonde guy with some vague caption about wild day with the crew. Someone had commented asking where I was, and the girl in the white dress had replied with a little broken heart icon and a joke about how she scares people away. Reading it was like being gaslit in real time. If you did not know what had actually happened, it would look like I had overreacted and run off, leaving her devastated and him confused. I almost typed a long comment explaining the entire story under that post, just to have my version somewhere out in the open, but I deleted it before I hit send. I knew how that would look from the outside. The dramatic ex-starting fights on the internet while everyone else tried to move on. So instead, I closed the app, got up, and forced myself through my usual morning routine on autopilot. I brushed my teeth, packed my bag, and walked to campus with my headphones in and no music playing, just so people would be less likely to talk to me. By the time I sat down in my first class and felt every muscle in my shoulders tense when he walked in and chose a seat on the opposite side of the room, I realized that breaking up had been the easy part. The hard part was going to be existing in the same small orbit while everyone else pretended nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Campus is small. You cannot really avoid people permanently unless you transfer, and tuition had already eaten enough of my soul, so I knew I was going to see all of them again. The first time I walked into our shared class after everything, the air felt about 3 times thicker than usual. She was in her usual spot. But something was different. The guys were not leaning in anymore, and my ex was sitting slightly apart, eyes on his notebook instead of on her. When I walked in, she gave me this tight, polite smile like we were distant acquaintances, and I gave one back. It was the fakest little exchange you have ever seen. Halfway through class, she raised her hand and asked to go to the bathroom, claiming she did not feel well. Normally, one of the guys would have immediately offered to walk with her, or at least checked on her. This time, nobody moved. She waited a beat, like she thought someone would change their mind, then got up and left alone. I could feel the tension radiating off her as she walked past. When she came back, her eyes were just the right amount of red and shiny, like she had been crying but did not want to make a scene. I watched her scan the room, waiting for someone to ask if she was okay. Nobody did. After class, on the way out, I heard raised voices down the hallway. I slowed down without meaning to. The guy with glasses was standing there with his phone in his hand, and the blonde guy was beside him, arms crossed. They were both facing her. Around them, students were pretending not to watch while obviously watching. You know that half-circle people form when they want to see drama but not be caught being interested? That. He was saying something about being tired, about how everything had always been about her feelings, her crises, her needs. She kept insisting she never asked for that they were twisting things, that she was just emotional. Then he held up his phone and read out loud a string of messages. I did not catch every word, but I heard enough. She had asked him to pretend to be mad at her in front of my ex after the soup incident so that my ex would prove how much he cared by chasing after her. She had written stuff like, "You know he will always pick me if it sounds like I am falling apart," complete with little crying emojis, which somehow made it worse. The hallway went dead silent. My ex was standing there too, face pale, looking like someone had just unplugged him. The blonde guy added that this was not the first time she had staged some emotional emergency to keep their attention. She tried to argue, to twist it, to say she was just scared of losing her friends, that she was traumatized, that they did not understand. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody comforted her. For the first time since I had met her, nobody rushed to smooth things over. She finally shoved past them and left, actually crying this time. And still nobody followed. I watched all of it from a few steps away, my back against a locker, pretending to check my phone. I thought I would feel vindicated. I thought I would get this satisfying rush of, see, I was right about her. Instead, I just felt tired. Tired and weirdly sad. It was like watching a play end and realizing all the actors were just exhausted people who had forgotten they could stop performing. Of course, campus being what it is, it did not take long for the story to mutate into a dozen different versions. Apparently I was, depending on who you asked, either the evil girlfriend who tried to cut him off from his lifelong support system, or the brave one who finally woke everyone up to her manipulations. I heard both versions while standing in line for coffee, while waiting for the printer at the library, while pretending to study in the student center. People would lower their voices just enough that they could pretend they were not talking about me, then glance over to see if I was reacting. One girl in class actually moved her chair when I sat next to her, mumbling something about needing more space, and I just stared at my notebook and tried not to laugh at how high school it all felt. Another girl made a comment about unnecessary drama, loud enough for me to hear. The guy with glasses found me in the library one afternoon, sitting between the psychology shelves and the self-help section like the universe had a sense of humor, and sat down across from me. He apologized. Again. He said he had known for a long time that the dynamic with her was unhealthy, but it had been easier to play along than to face it. He admitted he had stayed quiet at the coffee shop even though he had seen her bump the table. That stung more than I wanted to admit. He said he did not expect me to forgive him, and that he mostly just wanted me to know I was not crazy, that what I had seen and felt was real. I told him the truth. I told him part of me had absolutely wanted to win, to outshine her, to prove I was better. I told him I was not some innocent victim who had just stumbled into this. I had stayed. And I had played along. Because I liked the attention too. I liked being the one he looked at across the pool. I liked knowing that for a second, the spotlight had shifted. Saying it out loud made me feel exposed and gross, but also lighter. He nodded and said the difference was that I was willing to own it, while she had built her entire personality around pretending she never did anything wrong. When I got back to the apartment that night, my roommates were sitting on the couch with a bowl of popcorn between them like they had been waiting for an episode to drop. They paused whatever they were watching, and both turned their heads toward me in perfect sync, which would have been funny if I had not felt like my brain was still somewhere in that library conversation. I told them about talking to him, about admitting out loud that some ugly part of me had enjoyed the power shift when the guys started paying more attention to me than to the girl in the white dress. Saying it to him had felt like ripping off a bandage. Saying it to them felt even worse, because they had been there from the beginning, watching me twist myself into knots trying to be the chill girlfriend. One of them shrugged and said, "Welcome to being human," and the other said that at least I was not pretending to be some saint who had just been randomly attacked by drama. They reminded me of all the times I had swallowed things to keep the peace in past friendships, and how it always ended the same way, with me resentful and exhausted and someone else still unhappy. We ended up having one of those late-night talks that start with a joke and turn into a low-key intervention. They asked what it would look like if I stopped trying to win at relationships and just started noticing sooner when I was being asked to play a rigged game. It was not some magical breakthrough where I suddenly became wise and healed, but it did plant a small, stubborn thought in my head that maybe walking away earlier is not a failure. It is just a different kind of choice, one that does not come with applause but also does not come with a constant stomachache. My ex finally talked to me properly a few days after that. He found me in the small garden behind one of the academic buildings, the one with the sad little bench and the dying bushes. He looked like he had not slept in a week. He apologized, really apologized for the first time. He admitted he had known for a while that her behavior was intense, but he felt like he owed her his loyalty because of everything she had supposedly gone through. He told me about the other girlfriends, the ones who had fought with her and then disappeared from his life. He admitted, in this small voice that I almost did not catch, that part of him liked being the hero, the one who understood her when nobody else did. I let him talk. Then I told him something I had only just realized myself. I said that being loyal and being obedient are not the same thing, and he had confused the two so badly he could not see where his choices ended and her manipulation began. He flinched at that. He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled it back. I told him I believed he felt sorry, and I even believed he had been trying to do what he thought was right, but that did not change the fact that I had been in a relationship where I was always second place to someone else's feelings. He asked if there was any chance we could try again now that things were different. I almost choked. I told him nothing was different where it really mattered, because he still wanted me to be the girl who forgives everything as soon as he feels bad. I told him I did not want to spend my 20s training someone to treat me like I mattered. Then I got up and walked away, leaving him on the bench with nothing but his regret and the dead bushes for company. The girl in the white dress disappeared for a little bit. When she came back, she looked different, less polished. Her hair was pulled back in a messy way. No makeup, oversized hoodie instead of carefully chosen outfits. We ran into each other near the cafeteria one afternoon when no one else was around. She hesitated, then walked over. For a second, I thought she was going to start another performance, but she did not. She just looked tired. She said she knew everyone hated her now. I told her people did not hate her. They were just finally allowed to have their own lives instead of orbiting hers. She gave a bitter little laugh at that. She told me she had started therapy off campus, that for the first time she was talking to someone who did not immediately reassure her she was fragile and special. She said it was awful and confusing and she kept wanting to quit. I believed her. I also did not offer to be her new support system. I listened, I nodded, and I told her I hoped she actually stuck with it, because she needed to figure out who she was without a built-in audience. She asked if we could start over, maybe be friends. I said no, not cruelly, just firmly. I told her I did not have the energy to be near her, even if she was trying to change. Her face crumpled a little, but she nodded. We said goodbye like two people who had survived the same storm, but were not interested in sharing a boat again. When I walked away, I waited for the familiar guilt to hit. It did not. What I felt instead was something like relief. Life kept going. My job at the campus help desk still sucked in the exact same ways as before. People still came in at the last second before closing, panicking about their student accounts or passwords, and I still smiled through my teeth and helped them while wondering if I was ever going to get a job that did not involve being yelled at by strangers. My roommates and I still argued about dishes and rent and whose turn it was to buy toilet paper. In between the big dramatic moments, there was still laundry and homework and cheap frozen dinners and nights where nothing happened at all. The guy with glasses and I started hanging out more, but not in the way people probably expected. There were no sudden romantic montages, no we locked eyes and everything made sense moment. Mostly we sat across from each other in the library or met for coffee between classes and talked. He was blunt in a way I weirdly appreciated. He did not pretend the whole situation had not messed with his head, too. He admitted he had enjoyed being part of the inner circle, that he had liked feeling needed and important, and that it scared him to realize how much of his identity had been wrapped up in someone else's crises. One night, sitting on the floor of my bedroom with my laptop open and a pile of notes next to me, I realized I had not thought about my ex in hours. It hit me as this small, quiet fact, not some big revelation. I still remembered everything, obviously, but it was starting to feel like something that had happened to a younger version of me instead of who I was right then. I told my roommates about it at breakfast, and one of them said, "That is how you know you are actually getting over someone, when they stop being the main character in your brain." It sounded annoyingly like something you would see on a motivational page on a social media app, but it was true. The blonde guy came to find me one afternoon, nervous as anything. He confessed that he had gone along with some of her schemes in the past, thinking he was helping someone vulnerable, and that looking back, he wanted to crawl out of his own skin. He apologized not just for what had happened with me, but for all the times he had watched other girls get pushed out of the group and had done nothing. Listening to him, it really sank in that none of this had been one big villain against the world. It had been a whole group of people making tiny bad choices over and over until the whole thing collapsed. He told me she had reached out again, asking if he wanted to rebuild their friendship from a healthier place. He said he had told her he wished her well, but did not want to be part of her inner circle anymore. He looked almost sick as he said it, like a kid who just realized his favorite candy had been making him nauseous for years. I told him I thought that was probably the most honest thing he could have done, for both of them. Eventually, she messaged me too. It was a long text, full of words like accountability and healing and journey. It sounded a little like something copied from an article, but some parts felt real. She said she was trying to understand why she needed to be the center of everything, why she panicked when anyone else got attention, why she kept testing people instead of just asking for what she needed. She asked if we could meet one more time so she could apologize properly. I sat with that message for a while. The version of me from a few months earlier would have either jumped at the chance to be gracious or used it as a stage for some dramatic monologue. The version of me sitting on my bed that night, hair in a messy bun and laptop balancing on my knees, just felt tired. I agreed to meet, but I set clear terms. Public place, short conversation, no promises afterward. We met on a quiet corner of campus where there was a bench under a tree that only looked pretty for about 2 weeks in the fall. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way she carried herself. She took a deep breath and launched into this carefully prepared apology speech that hit all the right notes, but still felt strangely like a performance. I stopped her halfway through and told her straight up that I could hear the script in it. I told her if she wanted to actually apologize, she needed to drop the act and say what she really felt, not what she thought she was supposed to feel. She blinked, swallowed hard, and for a second I thought she was going to walk away. Then something broke. She admitted she did not know how to be vulnerable without also controlling the situation. She said when she was younger, the only time adults paid attention to her was when she was upset. So she had learned to stay upset, to stretch every feeling until it filled the room. She said being the fragile one had become her entire personality, and she did not know who she would be if she let go of that. I listened. I believed her. I also did not forgive her. Not in the way people expect when they hear a story like this. I told her I was glad she was finally talking about it with a professional and not just using her friends as unpaid therapists. I told her I hoped she figured out how to exist without making everything a test. But I also told her I did not want her in my life. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I did not trust myself not to slip back into the same patterns either. She cried a little, not loud sobbing, just quiet tears. Then she thanked me for being honest, and we left it there. Months passed. The campus drama machine moved on. People started talking about other scandals, other breakups, other group implosions. Every now and then I would catch a glimpse of her at a distance, talking to different people. She did not sit in the center of groups anymore. Sometimes she was alone, leaning against a wall, looking like she was trying to figure out how to just exist without performing all the time. I do not know if she actually changed. It is not my job to know. I saw my ex a few times too. The first couple of times, we did that awkward nod from across a hallway thing. Eventually, we ran into each other near the coffee shop where the soup incident had happened, of course. He was with someone new, a girl who looked kind and relaxed in a way I never had with him because I had always been on alert. He introduced us, and I saw that flicker of panic in his eyes as he waited to see if I would make it weird. I did not. I smiled, said it was nice to meet her, made some neutral comment about the weather, and then excused myself. I felt weirdly proud of myself for how boring the whole interaction was. One afternoon, the guy with glasses texted and asked if I wanted to grab coffee between classes. It was the same coffee shop as before, because apparently we were both into reclaiming cursed spaces. We sat at a different table this time, by a window, and talked about classes, future plans, and stupid internet videos. At some point, he asked if I ever missed my ex. I thought about it and realized I did not miss him so much as I missed the version of myself I had been at the beginning of the relationship, before I started shrinking and twisting to fit into someone else's life. I told him I was not sure I even knew who I was in relationships yet, that I seemed to default to either martyr or villain depending on the day. He laughed and said he felt about the same on his side. We both agreed that maybe the healthiest thing we could do for a while was stay single and figure out who we were when no one else was demanding we play a particular role. It sounded like the kind of thing people say and never actually do, but for once, I meant it. By the end of that semester, the bench behind the academic building, the pool at the recreation center, and the coffee shop had all become part of this weird personal map in my head. Each place had a little story attached. Here is where he warned me about her. Here is where the soup hit the dress. Here is where I panicked and went under for a moment. Here is where the messages were read out loud. Here is where I handed back the ring. For a while, it felt like campus itself was haunting me with my own choices. Then, slowly, those places started collecting new memories. Study sessions, dumb jokes, quiet afternoons where nothing dramatic happened at all. If there is anything I actually took from all of this, it is not some deep moral lesson about forgiveness or growth. It is more like a practical note to self. If someone ever tells me up front that there is a person in their life I am not allowed to have a problem with, or I will be cut out, I am taking that as my sign to run. Not because people cannot have close friends or complicated histories, but because I am not signing up to be the villain in a script that was written before I even showed up. The campus drama machine moved on eventually because there is always some new scandal to dissect over coffee. The last time I saw the three of them together was near graduation for the seniors that year. One of those chaotic, sunny days when everyone is taking photos and pretending the last 4 years made sense. My ex, the guy with glasses, and the blonde guy were standing outside the big auditorium in their gowns, taking pictures with their families. She was there too, standing a little off to the side with her parents, not quite inside the group, but not completely outside either. I was just passing by on my way to meet my roommates for dinner, when our eyes met across the crowd. For a second, it was like everything slowed down. Not in a romantic way, just in that strange, wow, we really went through all of that way. My ex lifted his hand in a small wave. I lifted mine back. The guy with glasses gave me a thumbs up, and I laughed even though he probably could not hear it. She held my gaze for a heartbeat, then gave the smallest nod, like an acknowledgement that we both survived. Then someone's relative yelled for them to all squeeze together for one more photo, and the moment was over. They turned toward the camera, and I kept walking. That was months ago now. Sometimes I still think about that night on my couch when he gave me his serious talk and I should have just gotten up and left. But if I had, I would not have learned the difference between being kind and being convenient, between having boundaries and building walls. My roommates still joke that I am dramatic, and honestly, they are right. But I would rather be too much for some people than not enough for myself ever again. The girl in the white dress is still out there somewhere, probably still figuring out who she is when no one is watching. My ex is probably still trying to save someone. And me? I am just trying to remember that the next time someone tells me I have to compete for a spot in their life, I am allowed to walk away before the first round even starts.